engineer, but I will tell you one thing. If the Hoover Dam is nearly as leaky as the NCAA is when it comes to matters of Michigan investigations, then several towns are screwed downstream. Late Kick is live finally. A little delay in the live stream tonight if you're watching the replay or listening on pod tomorrow. Disregard all that. Just pretend like we got it off without a hitch. But we are high atop a star-studded downtown Nashville, Tennessee recruiting and personnel symposium in town tomorrow. Going to be speaking at that event. Don't bother. It's closed to the public, but it will be fun. And we've got right here, listen to this sound, smack dab in our lap, we got new NCAA Michigan rumors and details. And do I paper pop it? Because half of you forgot that investigation was even going on. But nevertheless, we got new information today. I've got several things to talk to you about on that front that I doubt you'll hear anywhere else. Let me just put it that way. We've been well ahead of this. We will continue to be well ahead of it, so you're not wasting your time watching this show. I got fall camp whispers, intel. We got scoop from coast to coast. Got a lot of things that we're starting to hear. Now, granted, a lot of programs, a lot of teams are just now putting the pads on this week. It's that time of year. Oh, it's that time of year. I got record predictions tonight for Clemson and Tennessee. I got some schedule stuff. Best offense in the country. Who's it going to be this year? Just call your shot right now. Got some bold predictions. Got all of the things that we normally do this time of year. They're watching us in Berryville, Virginia, Montgomery, Alabama, Sugar Land, Texas, Athens, Ohio. Thank you guys so much. I know some of you just stuck with us through a little live delay, and your loyalty is appreciated. Tuesday show this week. So here's what's happening. I got to be on the road later this week, so we will have a Tuesday night show instead of a Thursday night show. The Late Kick Extra podcast, I'll give you Thursday or Friday, somewhere in that time frame. It's podcast only, so make sure you subscribe there. At Late Kick Josh on the socials, make sure you're following there because we had rave reviews from the way we did the Sunday show. I did live chat on the end of the Sunday night show. And dare I say it may become a staple around here, and dare I say we may not just do it on the show. We may just go full Friday Night Lines mode, but more frequently than just on Friday night. So at Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following. All right, big report here as we dive into August. Earlier today, I can't say I expected this today, but we got it. So Dan Murphy and Pete Thamel over at ESPN released a very eye-opening, I guess is the best way to put it, report on ESPN.com about the latest with the Michigan NCAA investigation into sign stealing. So quickly, because I know a lot of you have been at church, living your lives, and you haven't been paying attention and updating ESPN.com every hour, what we have here is they have gotten their hands on a draft of a notice of allegations that is going to be sent over to Michigan. A draft. They didn't even leak the actual thing. A draft. So more on that in a second. It was specified in this report this could change, as drafts often do. It could change. Sharon Moore could be in the crosshairs here. Could be suspended. Could get himself a show cause. That's the new head coach, by the way, at Michigan, because a lot of the guys who are, highlighted in this thing, Jim Harbaugh and the like, they're off to coach the Chargers now. And the NCAA doesn't have much oversight over college athletics. They have zero oversight over the NFL. There are some deleted texts that Sharon Moore, deleting texts. There are some deleted texts that Sharon Moore is accused of having with Connor Stallions that were recovered and then turned over. And so all of that is detailed in the report. You can go read that if you want to right now. I want you to listen to this line, and then I'm going to take you down a few roads I don't think you're going to be taken down many other places. The school, the University of Michigan, is facing a level 1 charge for, quote, a pattern of non-compliance, unquote. Okay, so, hey, I watched Pony Excess just like the rest of you. It's my favorite 30 for 30 as well. That's Pony Excess language. That's SMU in the 80s language. Let me spoil the ending for you. Nothing like that's about to happen to Michigan. So stop. I'm looking at the live chat. Go ahead and stop if you're going to start that. However, this is the way you talk, and these are the sorts of things you leak if you mean business. Now, there are people around Michigan who are chuckling at this. There are people around Michigan who are steadfast that not much is going to come of this. Their best guess would be, hey, maybe Sharon sees a game suspension, and, maybe we have to probation here, or maybe we have to fine ourselves there, but they really don't think much is going to come from this. There are people on the other ends, predictably in Columbus, Ohio, or State College, Pennsylvania, East Lansing, heard some drumbeat from around there today that this is going to be very serious. Let me just promise you one thing. You haven't been wasting your time here. Colin, throw up the tweet, in fact, because I had to remind some folks of this today. On November 1st, 2023, I got my hands on some footage. Don't worry about where I got it from, but I shared it with you. Half of you thought I was joking because of the phrasing I used on Twitter, but you're looking at it, and if you can't see, if you're listening on podcast, I said Pate State Investigates, and I trademarked that because it's a half-decent name for a search firm. Pate State Investigates has acquired the following video, wait for the blue light. And it's Connor Stalions. It's the former Michigan assistant, Connor Stalions, but he's not wearing a Michigan hat. He's wearing a Central Michigan hat. He ain't on the Michigan sideline. He's on the Central Michigan sideline. And you know what? He's not supposed to be there. And what we saw a pair of sunglasses, even though it was a night kickoff, and we saw a little blue light on those sunglasses. Those are recording. Those are recording video. Those glasses were recording video. I told you this November 1st because we had the footage here. November 1st, we acquired it. Pate State Investigates acquired it. We got called liars. Hey, guess what popped up in this report today from Pete Thamel and Dan Murphy some, 9 months later? The draft also states the NCAA has gathered evidence that shows Stalions was on the sideline at Michigan State's season opening game against Central Michigan. Stalions was wearing a bench pass, Central Michigan coaching gear, and a disguise, according to the draft, which states that Stalions' conduct, quote, seriously undermined or threatened the integrity of the NCAA collegiate model. The draft does not say how Stalions obtained a bench pass for the Chippewa sidelines. Now, I'll tell you, even I don't know how he got on the sideline. I just know that he was on the sideline, and we've known it since last November. So congrats to investigators for catching up there. Was that the only time? That the only time he pulled that off? It's one of the questions I have. Because I've heard rumors to the contrary, but I don't have evidence of it. If I did, I'd share it on the show. I had evidence of that. That's why I shared it with you in November. Next, this timing is very suspicious. The leak is very suspicious. Make no mistake, whether you think Connor Stalions and Michigan are going to have the hammer dropped on them, or one or the other will, or none of them will, and it's not a big deal, or maybe you think this is the biggest scandal in your lifetime, the NCAA has a lot of motivation for leaking this to who they leak it to, when they leak it. It's 100% tied to that documentary that's about to be released August 27th on Netflix, I believe is the date. Later this month. You won't have to wait very long. And so I am going to be guarded with what I say about that. I will just tell you the NCAA draft here says that Connor Stalions, quote, failed to cooperate with their investigation. What does that mean? What does it mean he failed to cooperate? You know, I haven't seen it written many places that Stalions was even interviewed by the NCAA, but he was. So they're claiming what did they try to, and he wouldn't talk? Is that what they mean by that? It's very nebulous. Notice it's very vague. Would he not talk at all? Did he talk but stonewall? Did he talk a lot but lie? Were there things you wanted from him that he wouldn't turn over? I'm going to make a bet with you guys. I will bet you when that documentary comes out, there's a lot more to that statement than meets the eye. He wouldn't cooperate. Now, normally, in these sorts of matters, when the NCAA makes allegations, whether it's in an actual notice or whether it's leaked secondhand to a reporter, when they make allegations about you, it's tough for you to fight back. It really is. When they say you didn't cooperate in your interview with them, it's tough to fight back. I wonder if Connor Stalions will have a way to fight back on that. Failed to cooperate, by the way, in these sorts of matters it's not something that you need to just automatically bite the hook of. Be careful on this. Be very careful on this, because failed to cooperate could look something like this. I sit down because I stole a ham sandwich from the lunchroom. And they ask me about the ham sandwich, and I tell them, here are the details, here's what I did, here's when I did it, and they got surveillance camera footage of me. It's pretty clear I stole a ham sandwich, okay? So it's an open and shut case. But then they ask for my cell phone. Then they ask for my email. Then they ask for my banking information, and I'm like, isn't this about a ham sandwich? Plus, I already told you guys I just did it. Why do you need that information? Don't worry about that, Josh. Just give it to us. Well, no, I'm not giving it to. He's failing to cooperate. He's a non-cooperative witness. Shame on him. Be careful is all I'm saying. Demonizing folks for not cooperating with the NCAA. sometimes these people understand that it's a one-way fight. Sometimes, and I'm not sitting here defending Connor Stallions, trust me, but I'm just saying in a very general sense, Michigan or Boise State, these folks at headquarters in Indianapolis, they still think it's 1997, first off. So they believe that they can wage wars in this manner. They still believe it's as simple as leaking to a cooperative reporter. And that's no shade on the reporters. I'd do the same thing Thamel and Murphy did if this got dropped in my lap. But what I'm telling you is they think it's as easy as let's leak there and let's get out in advance of whatever else is going to come out. And that's it. And we can control the narrative. No, you can't. You suck at this. The NCAA is terrible at this. I'll bet you something else. Bet number 2 of this segment. I got a really good feeling. These aren't Friday Night Lions locks, but I got a really good feeling that we're going to be vindicated on this. What you say if I told you the NCAA may have a whole lot more egg on their faces before this is all said and done than the University of Michigan does? What say you to that? So that's 2 bets if anyone wants to take me up on those. Failed to cooperate. Be careful how you read that. Does anyone, by the way, just a side note here, it has nothing to do with the investigation itself. It strikes me how no one at NCAA headquarters in Indianapolis seems particularly concerned that details about one investigation into one university keep leaking at a very disproportionate ratio to investigations in other universities. Does anyone find that odd? Does anyone care? Does anyone at NCAA headquarters care that the details of your investigations keep becoming compromised and thrown out into the public arena, or are you complicit in that happening? And if you are, you'd never admit it to me, but I have to baselessly then speculate as to why you may be okay with that. Let's get some things straight here. There's a big difference, switching gears entirely, there's a big difference in Connor Stallions acted alone, which I'm pretty sure he did, versus nobody knew. Of course you guys knew. If you're asking me to believe Connor Stallions acted alone, I'm cool with that. Rogue behavior, I'm fine with it. And even if that's not true, you'll be able to pass that off as true. And for the record, I do believe it's true. But if you're asking me to believe no one else knew there, you're asking me to believe you're idiots. And the folks at Michigan are not idiots. So many of those folks had at least some understanding of what was going on there. And anyone who suggests otherwise is expecting me to be stupid enough to believe that. I'm not stupid enough to believe that. I've got no source whatsoever, nor do I have any idea on how severe punishments could be on this. And I wish I knew. I don't know. The severity of the punishment, though, is directly tied to how motivated the NCAA seems to be to nail something to you. They seem very motivated here. Now, on the other side of this fence, you have a university that is ready, willing, able, and motivated on their own to fully defend themselves. Again, they may think it's 1997 in Indianapolis. It is not 1997 anymore. In 2024, the way this gets handled is university has mega law firm on retainer, and they swing much bigger hammers than you do at NCAA headquarters, and that's why you're fighting wars on 10 fronts and you're getting dominated on all 10 fronts in the courtroom because yours aren't as good as theirs. That's probably how this plays out as well. Does it change anything is really what I keep coming back to. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not trying to be one. What I am is a fan of college football. I cover this sport for a living. I've watched this sport as a passion since I was able to change channels on a television. I've seen investigations come and go before. I've seen wins vacated before. I've seen coaches punished before. I've seen scholarships stripped before. And sometimes I look at it and it changes my perception of a team. Other times I look at it and I laugh. All I can tell you is how I feel about Michigan from last year. You can feel however you want to. I know we're going to have a lot of disagreement on this. There's a world where Michigan does stuff last year that in retrospect taints my opinion of the wins they had. So far, nothing's been put in front of me that does that. I don't doubt they did stuff that was underhanded. I don't doubt that what Connor Stallions did was illegal. I don't doubt any of that. I think it was. I think they'll be punished to some degree for it. I don't even care if the NCAA comes out and says, hey, we're stripping you of that win. What did I tell you? I told you if I was a Michigan fan, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care because I saw it happen. I saw the wins. I was there in the Rose Bowl in overtime when we beat Alabama. I was there in Houston in the national championship. And oh, by the way, I may have even been there when we beat Ohio State for the third straight year. So I wouldn't care if I'm a Michigan fan because the NCAA can't vacate memories. And secondly, and I'm not a Michigan fan, but I was at all those games too. I stood on the sideline for every one of the games I just listed. I don't think Connor Stallions had anything to do with Michigan being able to put together that fourth quarter drive against Ohio State. I don't. I don't believe Connor Stallions had anything to do with Michigan coming from behind with about 5 and change left and them trailing Alabama, then getting it done with a stop in overtime. I don't think Connor Stallions had anything to do with that. I don't think he had anything to do with them largely owning Washington in the national title game. I just think they were the better team. I think they found a way. I think a lot of guys had their backs against the wall and they executed, and that's how I'll remember it. If you remember it differently, you go ahead and remember it differently. I just say my strategy on this is going to be I'm going to wait a little bit longer because as I've told you for a while now, I've told you I'm totally open to evidence being tossed out here that's not public yet that could change my mind. Still open to that. I just told you how I feel right now. If there's evidence that I don't know about, that hasn't been presented publicly yet, that's thrown out there that I look at and say, oh, now that's different than what I've seen so far. I may look back and say, yeah, I acknowledge none of that. That entire season's tainted for me. Now tear down the banner, and I'm tearing it down in my memory. Well, I'm not doing that right now. That's not how I feel about it. However, I don't have to feel any kind of way for Michigan to get hit fairly hard on this. And all I'm going to say is when your school, not a coach, you got several coaches facing individual level 1 violations. Their program is facing a level 1 violation, a pattern of noncompliance. The NCAA, as inept as they may be, as incapable of taking a leak without getting the front of their pants wet as they may be from time to time, they do not throw around phrasing accidentally. So they're throwing that out there for a reason. A pattern of noncompliance as a program means if they're throwing that at you, they intend on it sticking, and they intend on hammering you to some degree. Now, here's the other thing I'm going to ask. What's the Big Ten League office going to do about this? I have, and some of you probably actually don't know, 99% of this is handled behind the scenes. Let me assure you, there have been some borderline wars fought behind the scenes, not between universities and the NCAA in the past, specifically in my neck of the woods in the South. It's the league office in the NCAA. Because if you think these programs are worth what they're worth on a day in, day out standpoint from a television media rights perspective, and if you think those organizations who give the NCAA power, okay, the conferences give the NCAA the power it has, if you think they're actually going to let that group stumble into Ann Arbor, Michigan, and strip away a lot of the value that Michigan delivers on Saturday, I think you're crazy. I could be wrong, but I think you're crazy if you believe that's going to happen. Having said that, that's serious language. So I don't know what's going to happen. I do not know. I would encourage you, circle that date, August 27th. Netflix is not paying me to promote this, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Next up, football around the corner. Thank you guys for watching, by the way. We had a late start tonight, and still got a really, really sizable crowd here. GP said, the mic is peaking too much. It's just because I was yelling a lot. It's just because I was animated in the opening segment. So don't blame the mic. Blame me. Or some guy named Mike. Camp Whispers and Intel, my favorite time of year. What are we hearing? We call in all our favors. We get as much scoop and intel as we possibly can. Let me take you to LSU. Good buzz around Kyron Lacey right now. Now, he's not an unknown commodity. He had 30 catches, over 550 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. But when you got Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas exiting to the NFL, when you're replacing over 2,700 receiving yards and 31 touchdowns last year, you need studs. Kyron Lacey can be that. 6'2", about 215. He's had, albeit a short camp. So far, he's had a really good camp. I think he's locked in. The DBs will be the position to focus on this week because this week's when they put on pads. They've had some interesting rotations. Looking at Sage Ryan, for example, running at the corner position. Not where I thought I'd see him running at LSU a couple of years ago, personally, when he committed. So the DB rotations, that's the focus. The other focus for me is at the running back spot. They feel quietly confident at LSU about running back. Now, they've got monsters on their offensive line. So I want you to just imagine with me week 1 against USC. They're playing in Vegas. It's a Sunday night game. Imagine the LSU running back core is significantly more explosive and dependable than it has been. Their offensive line's a bunch of maulers. It is a matchup nightmare for USC to have that defensive front leaned on. If their secondary, the reason I keep mentioning DB is because USC's shot in that is just to torch LSU secondary. If they're slightly less torchable than they were a year ago, you got a possible matchup advantage that goes to a significant matchup advantage for LSU. At Miami, Sam Brown's a transfer wide receiver there. He is going to be very good. Cam Ward, transfer quarterback, everyone's talking about him, and they should be. Damian Martinez, the transfer running back, everyone's been talking about him from Oregon State. They should be. Sam Brown is a transfer that I've probably had more texts about through the first few days of camp than any of them except Cam Ward, and that's because he's the quarterback. Tyler Barron is an edge player who they are going to count on and who I think will deliver this year, and Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackle. They got a lot of hope and confidence in him as well. The reason I'm mentioning those names is because they're a bunch of transfers. So make no mistake now, the nucleus there is the freshman and sophomore classes, respectively, that Cristobal and his staff have recruited. But I think they may have killed it in the transfer portal, and if they did, they can win the ACC. If they did that, they can be a bona fide playoff contender. If they didn't, then, well, I don't need to tell you what happens if they didn't. If they did, you're going glass half full here. Big things can happen. Sam Brown, transfer receiver. Keep an eye on him. At Alabama, they are very green in the secondary. Alabama lost a ton of proven commodities in their secondary. When I was there in the spring, I sat down with some staffers. A bunch of them mentioned a kid by the name of Zabian Brown. Zabian Brown's a true freshman corner, 5-star corner out of California. He will play this year. He'll be an impact player for them this year. It is not an ideal situation to have to be playing true freshmen anywhere, but especially in the secondary. However, at the bigger programs, they do get freak shows in there every now and then. They had one named Caleb Downs there last year, for example, not to do the comparative analysis thing, but every now and then your Bamas and Georgias and whatnot, they get true freshmen in there where you watch them and you say, that's not a true freshman. Surely that's not a true freshman. Zabian Brown's one of those guys. Good weight room dude too, but really, really good football player. So he's shown out so far. And then Ryan Williams, the 5-star receiver, got a bunch of eyes on him. Smaller in body type, 6 foot, about 165. It doesn't matter any. Devontae Smith came in there one time, probably a little bit smaller than that, and left with a Heisman. So that's okay. But what's happening here is, you remember the names, Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, just random 4-star receivers that are like around every corner at Alabama, and you forget about them from time to time. A couple of those guys are going to pop just because of the offense they're in. And because I think they have enough confidence in the pass catchers they have, it's not like they're trying to baptize Ryan Williams by fire. Ultimately, he probably has more raw talent than anyone in that room. He's a very special player. He skipped a grade. He's supposed to be a senior in high school this year, too. So to be asking in real life a kid who should be getting ready for his senior year to be a staple in SEC play is a lot. He'll be able to play this year, but they can ease him in because of the confidence I think they have elsewhere in that pass catching room. So that's how they feel. Is that what they really have? That's the part B to all this. Penn State, not so good news this week, at least on the depth front. So Penn State lost Jamil Lyons and Kavion Keys, an edge guy and a linebacker. They had to dismiss them from the team. It's okay if the rest of their guys remain healthy. What we start to watch for in fall camp, Florida, I'm going to talk about them in a second. You get guys dinged up, and in this case, you have guys who aren't injured, but they're dismissed for the season for off-field related issues. And you go to your preview magazine or you go to your depth chart and you say, oh, that's okay, we've still got, yeah. But what you did do is you erased one line of depth. And it doesn't really matter against West Virginia in week 1, but it may very well matter in week 10 or week 11 because no one escapes a season unscathed from injury. So all of a sudden, I'm looking across the two deep there, defensive line, especially edge and linebacker. Like Tony Rojas is a kid we think will be a big-time player for them this year. We've had guys moving positions. Stay healthy and you're okay. But you got two guys there that were very, very important depth providers that all of a sudden, like Ohio State comes there in the middle of the season. Well, what if someone else has gotten banged up? And all of a sudden you're trying to stop those 1-2s at running back for them. And you're trying to also, contain, you're trying to set the edge, but you've also got Jeremiah Smith and you got Emeka Egbuka. Could get hard, is the point. So watch the depth situation defensively there. Now, James Franklin sounds really bullish on Drew Aller and this new offensive system they're running. It's not me talking, it's James Franklin talking. Sounds really bullish, talking about him being able to do a lot of things you hadn't seen him do before. I hope so. We'll see. At Nebraska, again, 1 week into camp. So far, so good on Dylan Raiola at quarterback. The one thing that we keep getting mentioned to us with these true freshmen who are going to start, where that's the case, the comms and the helmets this year will have a disproportionately positive impact, or so it's thought, on young guys starting. Like an edge that a young guy has now with the helmet communication system that they would not have previously had. Now, the counter to that is I've had some other coaches tell me, yeah, everyone thinks that's an edge. In reality, what's going to happen is a lot of coordinators are just going to have their quarterback's head swimming. And then it gets cut off 15 seconds prior to snap, and then coverages adjust and fronts move around, and all of a sudden you got a guy who is completely discombobulated, and it actually works detrimentally to a young guy. Don't know, because we haven't seen this. We haven't seen anyone go through this. Jamal Banks, is that wide receiver one there? Looks like it. That's a transfer from Wake Forest. We think we can count on defense at Nebraska. Offense has got to get a lot better. I mean, they've got some depth up front defensively, by the way, but Kiana Davis is a true freshman defensive end there, 6'5", 255, 260. Just remember that name. I think we'll be calling that name before too much longer. And at Florida, not great news this week. Montrell Johnson was running back one there. Not done for the season, but he went down and had to have a minor knee procedure. He's going to be out a few weeks, probably misses the start of the season. At least that's the word. Now, they didn't panic when they lost Trevor Etienne, the running back that went to Georgia, which I think should be illegal. Transferring to a rival should be illegal. When I'm college football commissioner, it will be. But right now I'm not, and it's not. But he went to Georgia. Now, they didn't panic. And they didn't panic because they got pretty good running back depth. Now it gets tested. Trayon Webb, Jacoby Jackson. It's the same thing with Penn State. Like, my Florida folks said, oh, it's okay, it's okay. Like, we want to get Johnson back. We'll get him back, but we'll be okay. I'm not saying you don't have other players, but it means something when the one you were going to start all of a sudden isn't there anymore. Now, they got dependable backs. They got dependable backups, but keep an eye on this stuff. There's also no guarantee that's the last time the injury bug bites you, by the way. Some of you hadn't even gotten into a full week of padded practice, Florida included. So keep an eye on that. Also, a lot of our team sites, like Swamp 24/7, Lions 24/7, Bama 24/7, Cody Goodwin giving us a lot of good intel. All of the team sites right now, I think through tomorrow, right, Jesse? Through Monday, you can get 60% off when you sign up, 247sports.com. So I think they should charge more for it personally, but I don't run 247sports.com. But you can get 60% off an already pretty low rate if you sign up through tomorrow. And the reason I mention that is because a lot of that will be found on those various team sites. Academy Sports and Outdoors, they're just a special place. Like they're running a special forever. The special is we're Academy, we're better than everybody else, and we'll prove it as soon as we open tomorrow morning. So Academy Sports and Outdoors, one-stop shop for all of your outdoor sporting goods needs. Your back-to-school stuff is there. Your back-to-sports is there. A lot of you need football equipment for the fall, but a lot of you need jeans for the fall, and you can get them both there. Everyone needs Big League Chew for every time of year, and you can get it in the checkout line. Academy.com, if you can't get there in person, they got your hookup. Love the folks at Academy. They love us. They make our show free of charge for you. So make sure before you do anything this fall and before you check out those other stores, or maybe even after you check out those other stores, just give Academy a shot. That's all they need. Just give them a shot. Academy.com if you can't get there in person. Okay, I love these segments. I love these segments because I'm giving you my full predictions. A lot of you don't want wishy-washy. A lot of you want us on the record. And by us, I mean me. So I'm going on the record, but the beauty in the segment that I'm about to do is in the comments below it, You give me your predictions, and so sure, I'm going to whiff on some of these, and it's going to be bad. It's not fun, but I'm going to nail some of them. And some of you are going to disagree with me, and I have screenshot many of your replies before, and I will screenshot many in the future. Notice the past tense of screenshot, as we have established, is screenshot. And don't let anyone in your schools tell you otherwise. So here we go. Texas predictions. It's that time. Let's just predict the Texas season this year. Here's what you need to know. The over-under win total is 10.5. That's very lofty. They've got the second best odds to win the SEC. They've got the fourth best odds to win the whole thing this year. So let me tell you some things I think I know about Texas. I think I know Quinn Ewers should be a really big offensive weapon. He's got skill. He's got the experience. He's playing for the right coordinator. I consider Steve Sarkisian the coordinator there. He's the quarterback developer. Sark's really, really good at that. So you got a multi-year starter there. That should be a weapon. He's among the top 5 in the Heisman odds. Should absolutely be a weapon. There are some parts of his game that are still loose that this year should round into form. The second thing I think I know about Texas is their pass rush should be very legit this year. Now, we got questions about stopping the run. I'll get to that in a second. But Trey Moore was a transfer from UTSA, I believe. Huge pickup for them. Was Anthony Hill's there? And so that's a stud, but you're adding another one potentially in Trey Moore. Pass rush should be there. Havoc rate should be through the roof. No excuse for it not to be for Texas. The third thing I think I know about them is, yeah, they're joining a tougher conference. They sure are. I think the SEC will have a positive impact on Texas. I think it'll collectively raise their level of play, too. Look at this lineup of teams Colin's showing you right now. It means something when you go into any given season, and you know you have to be better than Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, A&M, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma, instead of, all due respect, TCU, Texas Tech, Kansas, Iowa State, whether they ever admit it or not. Folks in Austin and even folks in Norman knew if they take care of their business, the rest of their former conference shouldn't be able to touch them. In the SEC, you could take care of your business and still lose 2 games. Georgia was a really good team last year. They didn't even make the playoff because they couldn't win the conference. And so in this league, when you know you're in this league, it's the whole tightrope walk analogy that I've been making to you. If you walk a tightrope 10 feet off the ground and you walk a tightrope 10 stories off the ground, technically, the process is still the same. However, there's a different level of focus. There's a different way you wake up that morning. There's a different way you eat breakfast, and there's a different way you carry yourself to that 10-story tall tightrope walk than there is the 10-foot tall tightrope walk. Because the ladder, you know you can fall off of, and it may scrape your knee up, but it's not that big a problem. I mean, Mick Foley's fallen further than 10 feet many a time in his WWF career back in the day. 10 stories, though, you're street pizza if you fall. So if you know the consequences are that, then you tend to mentally carry yourself a little differently. I was out there this spring. You could feel it in the building. You could feel it when you talk to folks, not even just on the coaching staff. In the communication department, you can feel it. So that's a big question, but I think that's the answer. I think it'll serve them just as well as them moving to the SEC serves the depth of that conference. Now, as for the questions around Texas, run defense, huge question. Run defense was number 3 in the country last year. They will probably not be number 3 in the country this year. Sweat and Murphy gone. You can't replace those. Now, you can pull the Billy Bean. You know, you can tear the top off a marker and spit it down the board, and you can say, we can replace them in the aggregate. Moneyball reference. They got talented players there. It's Texas. They're never going to hurt for talent. But, man, that was big-time talent in the middle. Now, here's why that matters. You've got to be able to control games, or else a bunch of games become one-possession crapshoots. And the best ones are built at the line of scrimmage, and they can control games. That doesn't mean they never get beat. That doesn't mean they never have close games. The control, like Michigan last year, controlled games. They were in one-possession games, most of their big ones, late in the season, obviously. But they controlled line of scrimmage. They could count on themselves to do that. If you don't have that, you could still win, but boy, there's a lot more variance that gets thrown into the potential outcome. The second thing that I wonder is, have we fixed the pass defense in Austin? they were quietly one of the worst in the country last year. They were 116th in pass yards per game allowed last year. Just a total invert of what they were against the run. Washington torched them. This cost them a shot at a national title. Washington torched them in the semifinal, and it was on display there. It wasn't the first time Texas folks saw it, but I think a lot of folks who hadn't watched Texas much said, wow. Well, yeah, it's a wow, because that was a wart they couldn't overcome. Have they fixed that? Third thing, they lost a lot of talented pass catchers. They lost their top 4. They lost their top 5, actually, pass catchers. Now, they added a lot of good ones, too. The way I figure it is, even in the best of worlds, you added all these cats this year. In the best of worlds, you hope to pull even with what you were last year. And if you're beyond what you were last year, that's great, but that is really tough to predict. So Isaiah Bond came over there from Bama. They got Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, Amari Niblack came there from Bama as well. If those guys can equal roughly what your production was last year, you ought to be a national title contender. It's a big if. You don't just snap your fingers and do it. And a lot of this portal stuff, it sounds so good. It is so much harder to get sort of across the board pan out on that, or validation or verification on that. The staff breakdown is interesting at Texas. So our internal model has Texas with the highest offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special team combo in the country. We count Steve Sarkisian as the OC there because Sark calls the plays. So OC, DC, special teams coordinator, it's the best 1-2-3 combo in the country. Their offensive and defensive support staff, we've got graded significantly lower. So the overall depth of the quality there could very well be that this looks different this time next year because there's none of me thrown into that model. It's just everyone judged on the same criteria. And so is there a coaching quality depth situation there? There may be, there may not be. But at the front line, they're about as good as it gets in the country. Sark is an excellent OC grade. He is still outside the top 25 as a head coaching grade right now for us. And, that includes Washington. That includes USC. So he's had a checkered head coaching career, so that shouldn't be a surprise. Now, 2023 was great for him. You bake in a few more of those years, and quickly he goes from outside top 25 to inside top 5. So that kind of stuff can happen. And you know what? If Sark really is a new head coach, none of his past really matters anyway. It doesn't matter what he was at Washington, if that's a night and day difference than what he is right now. But in order to be safe, when we work these grades, we're working your whole career, and then we heavily weight more recent. So we do have some recency bias in there. Schedule couldn't be much better. All things considered, Texas could not have asked for a much better introduction into the SEC. Now, they do play 4 of my top 15 teams in the JP poll, but they also play 5 of the bottom 6 teams in the SEC. And, again, you're not going to have an easy schedule here, but that's about as good as you could have hoped for. They go to Michigan in week 2. They start conference play against Mississippi State. What's the best case here? The best case for Texas is 12-0. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. They got a shot to win every game they play. Their toughest game is against Georgia. That's at home. They got Oklahoma and Dallas as they do every year. They got a shot to go 12-0. Their worst case is an 8-4 record. I think it's most likely Texas goes 11-1 this year. I'm really high on them. JP poll has them at number 4 in the preseason. There is still there's a little more volatility in predicting Texas than I think it sounds in my voice. I say 11-1, it just rolls off the tongue. No, I said worst case was 8-4 too. And you don't, I'm just telling you, you don't replace that much talent out wide seamlessly. You don't just magically upgrade quality of quarterback by 15% just because he returned. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You don't just replace those kind of guys on the interior of your defensive line. You don't just go from 1/16th in pass defense to top 10. So there are questions here, but it's questions relative to the rest of the country. So Texas has got a workable schedule, and their questions are first world questions. They're first world problems. And so with Texas, I'm going to say 11-1, but there's shakiness in my voice. I'm not falling over myself to go and bet max bets on every Texas game. The model may, but we know the model's history with Texas. Let's move on. So we have a lot in the show tonight. These shows, man, we went an hour 20 the other night, and we did the live chat, at the end of the show, the live chat got great response. The great response. If you missed the Sunday night show, I just basically looked at the live chat, and Kyle, for example, already properly using the past tense of screenshot in the live chat. I love it. I appreciate it. I looked at the live chat the other night after the show, and I said, you know what? Let's just talk. And I sat there and talked, and we covered a variety of subjects. Some football. Regrettably, a lot was not football, but that's okay. It's at the end of the show. If you don't like it, it's not for you. Tune out. little tidbit. We had our best audience retention ever on Sunday night show. Like in the history of us doing this since 2020, we had the best audience retention ever. And then we had a lot of comments about the live chat. So we'll probably be doing more of that. What are the biggest what-ifs in this sport this year? What if Ole Miss wins the SEC? That's a really big one. Oh, Josh, that can't happen. Well, it hasn't happened. You're right. You're right. One of Meemaw's golden rules, don't lose to food, so watch out if you're playing rice. But one of Meemaw's other golden rules is just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen. Ole Miss has got an over-under win total of 9.5 this year. They're among the odds favorites to win the SEC. They're up there in the top 4. And they've got the 4th best odds, so not top 4. They are number 4. If it happens, though, if they win the SEC, having never appeared in the SEC title game before, well, it means the experiment paid off. They've leaned about as heavily on the portal as any SEC program has. Can that work? Can that work? Well, if they win it, it's a pretty telltale sign it worked. Was the SEC down? So if this happens, that's one thing. How did it happen? Why did it happen? Was Georgia just not what we thought they'd be? Was Bama? Was Texas? Were a bunch of teams down? And Ole Miss was just the best of a bunch of pretty good? Or did Ole Miss win slugfests against the best? Did they maybe beat Georgia twice? Or did they split with Georgia when they got a second shot in Atlanta? Those sorts of questions I'd be interested in. And if they win the SEC, the logical follow-up is, can they win it all? They're going to the playoff if they win the SEC. I think they're going to the playoff if they just are in the SEC title game. Can they win it all? And what does this do for Lane Kiffin? Lane Kiffin is a legend if he does this. Lane Kiffin's doing what no one's really done in the modern era of like color TV at Ole Miss. So the story of Lane Kiffin, do you realize what kind of documentary we're seeing playing out in real time in front of our eyes with what Lane Kiffin's doing at Ole Miss? Pretty crazy. Another what if. Fingers crossed. What if the Big Ten is not so top-heavy this year? What if it is more than Ohio State and Michigan? And Oregon enters the equation, so they'll have a lot to say about that. Penn State's got a win total of 9.5. But let's look elsewhere, because if it's not top-heavy, I don't assume it's because Ohio State came back to the pack and Oregon came back to the pack. I assume it's because a lot of other programs that have been average raised their level of play. And it's very simple what has to happen here. Offense has to be a lot better. This is a Sarah McLachlan special of a stat. 6 offenses in that conference were 117th or worse in yards per game last year. Horrifically bad. Think about this. Colin, keep this up for a second. Immunity. Indiana was 101st in the country in yards per game offensively last year. And there were 6 offenses worse than that in their conference. That is bowling shoe ugly. That is dog water disgusting. Horrible. So, Iowa, improve. That could make the Big Ten not so top-heavy. Nebraska, Wisconsin, improve. And that would make the Big Ten not so top-heavy. Penn State, they've been pretty good. James Franklin thinks they'll be better offensively this year. Okay, I'm listening to that. Rutgers, most workable schedule in the conference. Greg Schiano, sleeves already rolled up, no matter what time of day it is. USC with Lincoln Riley, kind of a wild card in this discussion because offense isn't a problem there. They got the other problem. Maybe the Big Ten won't be so top-heavy, or maybe it will be. That's why it's a what-if. Thirdly, what if Cam Rising comes back better than ever? Well, we'll need a new producer for the show. For those of you who are new around here, producer Jesse has not shown his face on camera, but producer Jesse looks a lot like Cam Rising. Some have gone as far as to question whether they've seen Cam Rising and producer Jesse in the same place. And if he comes back better than ever from injury this year, what is his best? Well, back in 2022, 3,000 yards passing, had another 500 on the ground. He limited turnovers, 64.7% completion guy, 26 touchdowns, 8 picks. He ran for 6 touchdowns. If it produces at that level, they'll probably win the Big 12. They'll probably be in the playoff. And look, he's a 7th-year guy who is eligible for an 8th year, I think it is. I think he's playing his 7th. He's eligible for an 8th. Anyway, he's been non-committal. I think actually in the preseason he said, nah, 7's enough. Like, what a sentence to actually be able to say, hey, man, if he plays at that level, maybe someone gives him a shot in the NFL. Maybe he wants to come back again. Why would you turn down a career as a college football quarterback? That's what he is at this point, a career college football quarterback. Let's continue rolling merrily along here. Still got a lot to get to. Jesse, I'm looking at something. Oh, never mind. I thought I had carbon copied a page or something like that. Hey, I just want to tell you guys, because I saw some of you asking about this. I saw that story about Dion in Colorado. I didn't feel like I had a good enough grasp on it to talk about it on the show tonight. And it may be that we get beat on this and other folks get ahead of it and we're last to the party. That's okay. There were some pretty heavy allegations in that story. I think it was Anthlon that had the story. So if we're last on that one, we're last on that one. I saw it. I read it earlier today. We've had a million different things going on. It's a live show. So I can't tell Colin to stop and then let's go put together a segment right now. I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. Just being straight with you. So I'd rather let someone else do that. And we got another show Tuesday night, and maybe I'll lead the show with it for all I know. But I do need to make some calls on it, and I could not make those calls. And in lieu of that, I said, nope, we're probably not going to put in the show tonight. What I can do is I can continue talking about what we did plan on talking about. Clemson prediction. Let's just go on record here and now, you and I. They got a win total of 8.5. We checked FanDuel earlier today. The win total for Clemson has dropped to 8.5. Now, it's heavily juiced to the over because FanDuel does not land on even numbers. So they went from 9.5 down to 8.5. Well, that means they got to adjust the juice as well. But the point being, broad strokes purposes, Clemson's win total at 8.5. That's pretty low. That's very low. Those are the lowest expectations around there in a while. They still got the second best odds to win the ACC, but their playoff odds, their odds to win the whole thing, they've got the 17th best odds in the country to win the national title. That's a far cry from 7 or 8 years ago, more recently than that even. So that doesn't mean anything. Clemson's overcome odds before. Can they do it again? Well, what do you think you know? I think I know about Clemson. Defense can still be counted on here. Portal or no portal, they got really good players there. That defensive front especially. I'm very excited to see them against Georgia's offensive line. Week 1 in Atlanta, no less. The other thing, another thing I think I know about Clemson is they answered the bell at wide receiver. They finally got tired of watching a copy-paste of the same body type at receiver, not be able to get separation, not be able to pull away. And so TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco are both freshmen. Those are different kind of guys. They'll both play this year. They're not small. They're both 6'2" or taller, but they can move. And they're a little more twitchy maybe than some of the other guys they've had there. A third thing I think the program's backed into a corner a little bit. The whole chip on the shoulder thing. Now, in the past, that's when Clemson as a program has been at its best. They've also had really, really good players to be able to take advantage of that. In the past, Clemson was overlooked, but it turned out you shouldn't have overlooked them because they had really good championship caliber rosters. Is this a championship caliber roster? Remains to be seen. But I do think the attitude is that of one whose back is against the corner, or into the corner, shall we say. Now, big questions here. How much does Cade Klubnik progress as a quarterback? Year 2 under Garrett Riley's system. They were 98th in explosive play rate last year. Not good enough by a long stretch. That's not just him. The offensive line's got to be better, obviously. You got to have receivers step up, but the turnover issue was terrible last year, too. More on that in a second. Second question, is this secondary up to the standard of Clemson? I know I said we could count on defense. I think it's a little bit more questionable on the back end because they lost 6 of their top 8. This is Clemson. They backfill nicely defensively, but still at least maintains my attention when we go through fall camp. The third thing, going back to just the turnovers for a second. So you look at Clemson last year, and they failed to win double-digit games, and you think to yourself, because you watched them, and they were turning the ball over a lot, you must think, oh, they had terrible turnover luck. They were tied for number one in the country at forcing turnovers. They actually took the ball away a lot. They had 28 forced turnovers last year. Now, they turned it over offensively a lot, but that could be a good thing or a bad thing. If it carries over, if your defense takes the ball away a whole lot again, that's a great thing. History says we can't always count on that. History says that's a randomized stat, even with good defenses. And my concern is that Clemson didn't blow many people out last year. If they lose that turnover edge and they're not markedly better as a team this year, well, then what happens with the win-loss? That's why that win total's down at 8.5. A lot of questions like that are valid. What's the staff look like at Clemson? It is a top 2 staff in the ACC, according to our internal numbers here. Dabo's still got a top 5 head coaching grade, according to our internal numbers. Garrett Riley's coming off his worst year as an offensive coordinator. Now, that could be erased very quickly if they have significant improvement this year. But that's something to watch very closely. Wes Goodwin's defensive coordinator grade is still pretty low, but also he needs a lot more mileage before we can really get a good read on that. Overall, it's a good staff. It's an imperfect staff, but still a pretty good staff. Schedule breakdown, they got to have a fast start, or else you could have a rinse repeat of last year. Last year, they were out of the picture after the first month of the season. And this year, in the first 5 weeks, they got Georgia, they got App State, and then they go to Florida State. They got NC State as well. NC State's the third team on the schedule, and they got a bye week before NC State. In fact, they've got good bye luck against NC State and Louisville. Those are two of the better teams in the conference now. Louisville, Jesse, I think they play like 6 or 7 games before they face Clemson, who's rested, and they got a bye week. Clemson does before NC State as well. They go to Virginia Tech. Look at that game, November 9th at Virginia Tech. Woo, a lot of people in Blacksburg have circled that one. All right, the best case record scenario for Clemson this year, I think there is an 11-1 in the cards. It would take a lot of improvement. It would take them having good injury luck because they lack the depth that some of these other teams do because they haven't used the portal. They haven't had anybody leave. I know what the story is from up there. We hadn't had anyone leave, Josh. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to have more than we're allowed to on our roster? I'm just saying what I'm saying. You don't have the depth that you've had. You got a lot of players there. You don't have the quality Clemson depth that you've had. Stay healthy, and that's okay. Win the close shootouts, have fortuitous turnover luck, and you go 11-1. If you don't, there's a 7-5 here. And if it's 7-5, and that your over-under win total is 8.5, so that's not crazy at 7-5. Huge questions after the season. I got Clemson going 9-3. I got them preseason power rated number 19. Now the ACC's not out of reach, but I got Florida State solidly ahead of them, and I got Miami right there with Clemson in terms of quality of team. So 9-3 is what I'd have. I don't think that's good enough to make the playoff. I would not guess they make the playoff with that record. Some big questions. We've got a lot of questions this time of year. One of my questions, by the way, is a lot of you watching right now. Just quick question. I want you to take a look. Are you subscribed to the channel? Because it's free. Doesn't cost you a dime. And that's how we keep the show free. So we appreciate you watching. Just make sure you're subscribed. If you're listening on podcast, appreciate it. Probably at the gym, probably driving around, killing time at work, still laying in bed. I don't know what you like to do. I just appreciate that you let us join along. Check and make sure you're subscribed. A lot of you think you are and you aren't. So make sure, because it doesn't change anything for you, but it really helps us. Okay, that's a question that wasn't written down on this piece of paper. Here's one that is. Who do you think will have the best offense in the country this year? One of my close personal friends asked me earlier today. I figured, well, I'm not going to answer you privately. I'll just answer you publicly. 2023. Just total yards per game. LSU was the best. Oregon was up there. Oklahoma, Liberty, Georgia, North Texas, UNC, UCF, Texas, USC. Those were your top 10. So Ohio State wasn't top 10 last year. Ohio State could be in that conversation this year. They've got explosive potential at wide receiver. Everyone's ready to see Jeremiah Smith, but you've also got Emeka Egbuka there. You got Carnell Tate there. They should have sledgehammer options running the football too, though. If that offensive line is anything improved relative to last year, they should. With Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins in the backfield, they should really be able to play any style they want to. Now, maybe that means they grind it out a little bit more and they don't put up incredible yardage numbers, but they're a better football team. If that's the case, they may not be in this conversation, but that's because they're in better conversations. Oregon, I think, should be in this conversation. I mean, if we're talking 1-2 combinations at wide receiver, Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart's about as good as it gets. That's it. That's an elite 1-2 combo. The list doesn't end there. Dylan Gabriel came in via the transfer market, so that's as big a pickup as we saw anywhere in the country. They're really good at offensive tackle, and Will Stein's one of the best up-and-coming coordinators in the country. So Oregon absolutely belongs on that list for a bunch of reasons. What about Georgia? You know, Georgia was a top 5 offense last year. Georgia could very well be a top 5 offense this year. Carson Beck's back. That was their biggest pickup. We hang out in Athens, and everyone's talking about every other player, and they say, well, Carson Beck coming back. That was our biggest pickup. But Trevor Etienne's not bad either, the running back from Florida, because he gets to run behind an elite offensive line. They're in a good spot at wide receiver. Even with the dismissal of Rara, they still got Dom Lovett there. They are very good at tight end, even after losing Bowers. Oscar Delp is there. Lawson Lucky's there. Ben Urasek, the transfer from Stanford's probably the sleeper in that offense. Georgia, I think, could very well have another top 5 offense. Now, that is not shocking for people who pay attention to the sport, but this one's even less shocking. Ole Miss should kill it offensively this year. Jackson Dart returning. Even though they lost Judkins at running back, Ulysses Bentley is one of my favorite players now. Ulysses Bentley is a stud at running back. You'll see that very soon. Some of you have already watched him. But if you haven't, you'll see. They're loaded at wide receiver. Their offensive line's the only minor to moderate question here. If they get even B- to B level offensive line play, and they continue to improve throughout the year, as good teams do, man, there are some names that you'll see play on Sunday that are going to play their Saturday ball in Oxford this year, all at the same time. It could be a special year there. And lastly, I'm not overlooking Tennessee. We had a few different options for this last spot. Tennessee could be one of the best offenses in the country this year because Nico Iamaleava, I got that much belief in him. I think the staff has that much belief in him. But do you realize the wide receiver talent they have there still? Don't just be forgetting about Brew McCoy or Squirrel White. He's still there. Dante Thornton last year came in. I thought he'd do big things. I still think he could do big things. Chris Brazel. So they've got proper transfer fits. Offensive line, I think, is a question for a lot of folks, and they have a little more confidence than the outside world does. They're good enough at running back. It's Josh Heupel. They had the number 1 offense in the country 2 years ago and could very well be in contention for that again this year. Now, while we're talking about best offenses, and we were doing some record predictions earlier, we had all these scrap papers off on the side, and I said, well, Jesse, if we did all this research on schedules, shouldn't we just go ahead and talk about who has the toughest one? Some of this is just brutality. I'm going to take a sip out of the nondescript water jug for just a second, if you'll pardon me. Thank you. One of these you know about. Several other of these you might not have paid attention to. So here we go. I'll tee it up like this. Who has the toughest schedule in college football this year? Now, a lot of you have paid attention to Florida. I'll get to them in a second. But let me just say, I don't think Cal plays the toughest lineup of teams. I don't think UCLA plays the toughest lineup of teams. But, man, 26 of 32 NFL teams this year will travel fewer miles than Cal will. And they play several more road games than Cal does. Cal will nearly circumnavigate the globe this year. The Earth, circumference-wise, is 24,900 or so miles around, for those of you that believe in that sort of thing. Cal will nearly travel that many miles this year. UCLA, still even worse than that. So circumnavigating the globe for conference play, plus a little token trip to Hawaii for UCLA. That's where we are. That's where we are. Once upon a time, conferences were about regionality and territoriality, and now it's about flying halfway to the moon. Just to play Rutgers. No, we have no problem with Rutgers. Florida has the toughest schedule in the country. Okay, let's not beat around the bush any longer. Florida, listen to this. Sorry, that was not a viable paper pop. There we go. So the JP poll came out last week. Obviously the most reputable poll known to mankind. Florida plays 10 of my top 30 teams this year. Every game from October on is against a top 30 team. Every game. They play the top 2 teams in the ACC just as an added out-of-conference bonus. They play Miami and Florida State. Those are my top 2 teams in the ACC. This is the worst one. So I've got them power rated 21. Florida, quality of team, forget the schedule. The quality of Florida's team, I've got them power rated 21 in the JP poll in the preseason. Number 21 team plays 8 teams rated ahead of them. 2/3 of Florida's schedule consists of teams rated higher than number 21. And yet I will have Casual Carl walk in this building every day of the week and tell me, not Carl Reed, by the way. Casual Carl is a fictitious person. But Casual Carl will stroll up to you and say to your face, you are what your record says you are. You know Florida could win the Big 12, right? If I just took them and plopped them in the Big 12, they could win the whole thing. And they would be a Power 4 conference champ. Instead, they have to essentially play the Kansas City Chiefs schedule. There's a hidden story here, though. For all the warranted attention that Florida's schedule is getting, you know whose schedule isn't that far behind, and it's Georgia. And that hadn't been a headline lately. Georgia's had a pretty easy schedule because they've been in a terrible division, and the division doesn't exist anymore. Georgia faces 7 teams in the top 25 to win the national title at FanDuel right now. They got the odds listed to win the national title. Georgia faces 7 of those teams. Georgia faces 6 teams I have rated 21 or higher, and 5 of those 6 games are away from Athens. So they go to Texas. They go to Bama. They go to Ole Miss. They got Clemson in Atlanta. They got Florida in Jacksonville. The only game they play in Athens, which one is it? Tennessee. Tennessee they get in Athens after they go to Oxford, by the way. So that is a tough road to hoe, as Meemaw would say. Georgia Tech is a case study team this year. Georgia Tech is a sneaky good team that probably doesn't have much of a shot in the ACC because of their schedule. They face 6 teams in the top 25 odds to win the whole thing. They got Notre Dame and Georgia in their out-of-conference schedule. They play 6 of the top teams. They play 6 of the 8 top teams in the ACC. Now, I want you to compare that. So here is how crazy the difference in scheduling is. The difference in strength of schedule in college football, it makes or breaks your season. So I just read you Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's playing Notre Dame and Georgia. They got 6 of the top 8 teams in their conference. Now I want you to compare that to Syracuse. Syracuse plays Ohio, Holy Cross, UNLV, and UConn in out-of-conference play. They do not face Clemson. They do not face Florida State. And they get Virginia Tech and Miami at home. What if I just gave Georgia Tech that schedule? How different would the expectation level be with Haynes King coming back? A lot of close losses last week. Even played Georgia tough last year. Last year. But that ain't the way it is, because schedule is that disproportionate in the sport. Mississippi State, just pray now. Just start saying your prayers now. Brutal road schedule here. So they go to Arizona State in week 2 as an out-of-conference game. They're just going from Starkville to Tempe. Probably not many direct flights for the fan base. They've got a road game at Texas. They've got a road game at Georgia. They've got a road game at Tennessee. They've got a road game at Ole Miss. I'm not done. Then they come home and get to play Missouri and Texas A&M and Florida. That's 7 teams in the top 21 of the JP poll. Texas is number 4, Georgia number 1, Tennessee 14, Ole Miss 8. They play all those teams on the road and they get number 13, 15, and 21 at home. Who in their right mind made that schedule? I don't know. So those are the toughest schedules to me in the country. FanDuel can take any action you want. Okay, you think that I just read that and you don't think that schedule is all it's cracked up to be? Well, go bet the over on Mississippi State right now. Conversely, if you think Florida is going to implode on themselves like a dying star, bet the under. Whatever you do, just do it at FanDuel. Maybe you're sitting there thinking to myself, I don't even bet. That's fine. You just want to go over to FanDuel. And for those of you who think I'm kidding about that, I'm not. So anyone who's ever bet sports either has themselves gotten in trouble or has known a buddy or two who have gotten themselves in trouble. Yet don't get yourself in trouble betting on this stuff. And if you got any question about whether you got a problem, don't do it. Back away, take your phone, crow hop once or twice, and throw it in a river before you're betting money that you can't afford to lose. Responsible gaming, we would never partner with FanDuel if they weren't about it and if they weren't totally comfortable with us talking about responsible gaming. So the best responsible gaming, if you got any question about this stuff, is don't do it. If you got any question about whether you can afford to lose, don't do it. And don't be borrowing money. Don't be doing any of that stuff. Just you can make some fun side bets with me for something other than money before you start doing that. However, if you're in a position where you can and you're so inclined, FanDuel is the exclusive odds provider of our show. We work very closely with those guys. I partnered with them because they're totally fine with me saying stuff like I just said. We wouldn't partner with any other sports book or online sports book because not all of them are about that. FanDuel is, and we appreciate them. So that's the one I would encourage you to do business with if you're looking to do business with someone. Lastly, we have bold predictions. Make sure you're subscribed, by the way. Appreciate it. Big crowd. Make sure you're subscribed if you're watching the show. What is it that you believe this year? Listen to this piece of paper. What is it that you believe that strongly, that shaking that paper so strongly that you would bet your own money on it? Well, I got one about Alabama here that would be very lofty. Mason in beautiful Dahlonega, Georgia, gold country. He said Bama's going to win the SEC championship and Jalen Milroe wins the Heisman. Now, he said they're going to go 12-1. Forget the record. Mason, word to the wise, if you predict a guy to win the Heisman and your team to win a conference, I don't need to know their record. It's already bold enough. This is a 9.25 for me. Now, Milroe's got the fourth best odds to win the Heisman. Bama's got the third best odds to win the conference. Obviously, if one of them happen, it's highly likely the other one is more likely to happen. So there's a little correlation there. However, Jalen Milroe threw for 225 or fewer yards in 8 games last year, so that would need to uptick pretty seriously, and it probably will in this new offense. He'll have better snaps because it can't get worse, and probably less sacks as a result. So that will greatly increase his odds. They got a tough road schedule, though. I mean, they go to Wisconsin in week 3. It's not just some gimme game. They got Georgia the 28th of September. They go to Tennessee. They go to LSU. They go to Oklahoma. He'll play on national TV a lot, that's for sure. I'm going to make that a 9.25. It's not that I don't believe. It's just that's really hard to do. Next up, Lou from Piscataway, New Jersey, says Rutgers will make the playoff. Now pause, Colin. Leave that screenshot up because Lou is a real one. Not only did Lou say Rutgers is going to make the playoff, he was smart enough. They're smart up there in Piscataway. He was smart enough to know I would call BS on this because I was going to. When Jesse brought these to me today, I looked at this, Lou. I've got to be real with you. I looked at it and I said, this guy didn't bet this. And producer Jesse says, well, it just so happens he screenshot his bet slip. And there it is. And Lou's not putting $2 on this. Lou put down $50 to win $950 if Rutgers makes the playoff. Because at FanDuel right now, that's at plus 1,800. Well, I think this is a 9.75 on the boldness scale. Their over-under win total is 6.5. Okay, so for Rutgers to make the playoff, they got to go way over that. They're top 15 in returning production, so Lou's got something going for him there. very workable schedule. They don't play Ohio State or Oregon or Michigan, or I don't think they play Penn State either, do they? No. So that's as workable as it gets. They play some dude named Howard in week 1. They got Akron in week 2. They go to Virginia Tech out of conference in week 3. Very workable. This is, I'm going to say this as respectfully as possible. This is still Rutgers, all right? There is still a talent deficiency that you have to make up for. Now, they do get every ounce of potential out of that team. I don't doubt that Greg Schiano will do that, but we're not talking about winning 8 games. We're talking about going to the playoff. They probably have to win the Big Ten to do this. You know that, right? Because the trade-off for having a schedule like that, it's ranked 63rd. It's the lowest ranked schedule in the Big Ten. The trade-off for that is you can't just go 10-2 and expect to have an at-large spot. They probably wouldn't have that. So they probably have to go and win the Big Ten to do that. Schiano Magic, is it there? That's a 9.75 for me. Next up, we got a thread the needle special here. Clint from Montgomery, Alabama said Florida State loses the ACC championship game to a team not named Clemson or Miami. Okay, so what do we have to have here? Well, we got to have Florida State make it, which they're favored to do. But then we've got to have Miami not make it. We got to have Clemson not make it. Now, maybe Florida State beat both of them. They do play both those teams. So maybe Florida State had something to do with both of those teams missing out. But then what do we have to have? We got to have NC State there. We got to have Louisville or Virginia Tech or SMU. And one of those teams has to beat Florida State. So FSU's good enough to get there. The other two aren't. We'll have an underdog situation no matter which team does make it there. And then they got to beat FSU. A lot of stuff had to happen there. And I think it's bold enough to warrant a 9.5 on the boldness scale. So good job. Because if that comes true, you're getting a chalice of supremacy. Clint from Montgomery. And lastly, sounds like a Bonnie Raitt song. Clint from Montgomery. Angel from Montgomery was a Bonnie Raitt song. Yeah, Clint from Montgomery. Who knows? I'll text her. Let's see. Braden from Pensacola said, no playoff spots are lost on conference title week. How about that? Every Power 4 team that's in a conference title game makes the playoff. Now, in the SEC, I don't doubt that. I think both the teams in the conference title game will make the playoff. The Big Ten, I think both the teams in the conference title game will make the playoff. The ACC, it's somewhat likely both teams make the playoff, but I'm not totally sure. In the Big 12, I don't know about that. So, if we just look at the odds, Colin's got it up right now. If the odds to make the playoff are in front of you, which they are if you're watching, Utah is the favorite to win the Big 12. Their odds of making the playoff plus 240. Just for comparison, the top 3 teams in every other conference have better odds than the number 1 team in the Big 12. So they're trying to tell you, expect 1 from the Big 12. Be happy if you get more than 1. I'm not sure this is going to happen across the board. Okay, and even if it does in the Big 12, it could come at the expense of the ACC. So I'm going to call this a 9.25. Every team that plays in the conference title game in the playoff, I'm not necessarily feeling it. All right, here's what we got to do. So we got started late tonight, which means we wrapped the show late. It's 8:44. I'm sure someone tuned in late and just thinks we've been going for an hour 45. No, it'll happen during the season, but it didn't quite happen that way tonight. I've got to give Director Colin time to cut this up. So I have heard your suggestions about the live chat. I am going to heavily lean into the live chat in coming shows. Tonight, because of technical issues, we're not going to necessarily do that a lot. But the Tuesday night show, remember that, Tuesday night show this week instead of Thursday, all bets are off. Until then, for Director Colin, for producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care, have a great start to your week, and God bless.